Is a grill the secret to the best homemade pizza? Welcome to the next episode of me slowly learning how to use my recently acquired grill. In case you haven't been following along, I've just been gradually trying to cook different random things outside to slowly learn the ins and outs of my Kamado Joe. So naturally, I eventually had to try pizza. The idea is that you can get your grill a lot hotter than you can get your oven inside, so in theory you should be able to match that super hot, fiery oven taste that you only get from restaurants. So I'm gonna see if that's true. I'm going to be going with a rough New York style pizza because that's just my favorite and the dough is pretty easy to throw together. For best results, you should start this at least one day or preferably like 3 to 4 days before you're actually going to eat the pizza. That's going to allow the dough to ferment and take on that really strong yeast flavor that everybody loves. So my recipe is just enough for 2 pizza doughs because I'm single, but you can easily scale this up for more. Into the bowl of a stand mixer, I'm adding 250 mils or just over a cup of warm water. And by warm, I mean between like 90 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit. That's going to be the best environment for the yeast to proof. And speaking of yeast, I'm going to dump in 1 packet or 7 grams of active dry yeast. And to feed them, just a couple of teaspoons or about 8 grams of granulated sugar. Just mix all that up and let it sit for like 5 minutes to make sure the yeast are alive. Or if you're confident they're alive, you can move straight on to the next step, which is adding 375 grams or just over 3 cups of bread flour. This gives us a 67% hydration dough, which is pretty on par for New York pizza. I also add 8 grams or like a heaping teaspoon of kosher salt for flavor, and 15 milliliters or a tablespoon of olive oil for richness. Then just pop that under the dough hook attachment and let your stand mixer go to work. Once it brings all the ingredients together, it'll start to knead your dough and you can bring it to high speed. And again, for doughs like this, you should always be mindful that the flour content is variable and you may have to adjust it. A certain final texture is what you're looking for, which in this case is a dough that's pretty sticky to the touch. It should leave a little residue on your hands when you handle it, but it shouldn't be so liquidy that it just kind of pours through your fingers and is like impossible to handle. Just add flour as you go on an as needed basis. And of course, the kneading is done when you can stretch the dough so thin that you can see light through it without it tearing. This is known as the window pane test. And for reference, my stand mixer takes about 8 minutes to knead this dough fully. Then I'm just going to grease up a couple of big sealable containers with some olive oil, and then using guesstimation, I'm going to divide the dough in 2 by hand, roll them around in the oil a bit, and then seal them up and toss them in the fridge. And again, let these ferment for at least a day. It gets better with time to an extent. I'm only doing these a day before, so it's okay to do that, but 3 to 4 is usually ideal. But I'm also going to make the tomato sauce the day before to let those flavors develop as well. And for that, I'm starting with a 28-ounce can of whole peeled tomatoes. A lot of people rave about these tomatoes from the San Marzano region of Italy, and for good reason. I think they are typically the best that you can get from a local grocery store, but they're also more expensive, and sometimes I want to save $1 or 2. So I'm going with the same brand of tomatoes here, just the non-San Marzano ones. And from experience, I think the flavor is slightly less powerful than the good stuff, but to me, not enough to make or break the pizza, so that's up to you. Anyway, I'm just fishing out the actual tomatoes and leaving behind the sauce that they're packed in. That'll help our sauce to be thicker, and the good flavor is in the actual tomatoes, so don't worry. Then I'm going to go in with about 30 mils or 2 tablespoons of olive oil, a couple of cloves of minced garlic, a tablespoon of tomato paste for a little boost of concentrated flavor, sugar to your tasting. I added about 4 grams or a teaspoon, and then a nice pinch of oregano, and then an optional pinch of red chili flakes for spice. And then I'm using a non-normal ingredient here, which is jarred roasted red bell peppers. I think these are a nice ingredient to add to a lot of dishes, especially tomato ones, but you do you. And then salt to your taste. You should add a good bit at the beginning because these tomatoes do need seasoning. But as always, I always add salt to taste as I go. I'm going to use my immersion blender to combine this, but if you don't have one, you can either do it in an actual standing blender, or you can simply just crush the tomatoes in by hand and leave it more chunky. Up to you, but I'm going to blend this into a puree because that's how I like it. Again, add salt and sugar to taste, and then this can go in the fridge to rest. I'm also going to shred my cheese in advance just to have it ready, and I think the best option for this is whole milk low moisture mozzarella, which surprisingly can be pretty hard to find. Most of the low moisture mozzarellas are going to be part skim and have less fat, therefore less flavor, but I do have one Walmart in my whole area that sells this low moisture whole milk version. I'm just going to pass that through my box grater and have it ready to go. So in order to cook pizza on the grill, you should ideally have a really high temperature. So I'm going to fill up most of my charcoal chimney and light that. And after about 20-25 minutes, I'm going to dump that on my grill and add some more unlit charcoals for extra fuel. And the way I'm setting this grill up is with 2 stages of indirect heat. I'm putting both of my heat deflectors on top of the grill grates, and then I'm going to try another barrier between the deflectors and the pizza stone. I'm just worried about the stone getting too hot underneath and kind of scorching the crust, and I couldn't find anything else to make this second stage of indirect heating, so I'm just going to use one of these house bricks. This would have been a lot safer if I had 2, but I only had 1 in my possession, so please don't be stupid and do not try this. I just didn't have any other option at the moment. There's plenty of other ways to lift something in your grill, and you can look those up. But yeah, stupidity aside, I'm going to balance the pizza stone on the center of this brick, and I'll just be really careful when I'm lowering the pizza crust onto it. But I'm going to close my grill and let that come to as high of a temperature as I can get, which after like an hour, it was plateauing at like 500 degrees. Obviously, I'm still learning the parameters of this thing, but I thought I had plenty of fuel in there to get it to a lot hotter temperature. When I just recently made carne asada, it was getting up to 800 to 900 degrees with about the same fuel, I think. But I don't know, I'm just going to light another half chimney and see what happens. which after dumping that in and waiting like 2 total hours since I started, it did seem like the temperatures were finally climbing to around 800, so I thought it was time to build the pizza. I started with a pizza peel, which I think is a really handy tool to have in the kitchen if you make a lot of pizzas. I'll link it below. But I'm going to coat that pretty heavily in some cornmeal because that's the best way to shake off a pizza crust and not let it get stuck. And I'm going to dump a good bit of flour onto my clean work surface, where I'll then pull out my fermented dough from yesterday and dump that out. I just flip it a couple times to get both sides coated in flour so it doesn't stick. And I just kind of like to use my hands and my palm to swivel this out and stretch it. I'm just basically trying to keep it even and then fit it to my pizza peel, which is about the same size as my pizza stone. And it will pull back a bit because of the gluten strands and because of it being cold, but just keep working it and you should get it to where you want it. I'll then carefully lay it evenly on the pizza peel, and don't take too long here because the warmer the pizza dough gets, the higher chance it has to stick to the peel. I'm just going to spoon on a few dollops of the homemade sauce and spread it all around. Don't overdo this here unless you want a soggy crust. Then I'm going to use my microplane and just grate on a little bit of Parmigiano Reggiano. That salty bite between the toppings and the crust is iconic. Then I'm just going to add generous handfuls of the mozzarella cheese until I can coat the whole top of the pizza. And you can stop here with just cheese, that's kind of standard for New York pizza. But of course I'm going to add a bunch of pepperoni because I love it. And then my all-time favorite pizza topping, which is black olives. Don't judge me for that. To finish off, I always hit my pizzas with a pinch of oregano and a pinch of flaky salt. Then it's out to my grill, where I'll try to work quickly so as not to lose a bunch of heat. I'll just shake the crust a couple times to make sure it's loose, and then slowly and carefully lay it onto that pizza stone, especially making sure not to tip it over on top of that brick. And I'd say I did a not too shabby job here. But now quickly close the lid and start to let it bake. So I had no real bearing of how long this was going to take, so I opened it after about 2 minutes, and I just tried to rotate it a bit to ensure even cooking. But this was honestly cooking a lot slower than I expected. I thought with such a thin crust it was only going to take a couple minutes, maybe like 5 minutes max to cook, but it was clearly taking its time, so I was just going to let it do its thing. And after checking it a few more times, I decided to pull it around 10 minutes. The crust still wasn't as brown as I probably would have wanted, but those toppings were starting to ooze out a bit of fat and I didn't want to leave it on any longer. So I just pulled that to a wire rack to keep the bottom of the crust from sogging up, and I actually kept this in my oven at its lowest temperature to keep this pizza warm while I made the other one. Which, speaking of, since I didn't have a lot of browning on the first crust, I decided to make a change to the grill configuration and I removed the second stage of indirect cooking, meaning I took the brick off and just put the pizza stone directly on the heat deflectors. I just wanted it to conduct a little more heat and crisp up that crust better. So while that was heating, I started to build my second pizza the same way. Stretch the dough, sauce, Parmesan cheese, mozzarella cheese, pepperoni, and black olives, and sea salt and oregano, and back to the grill. So I did the same thing here. I just lowered the crust onto the pizza stone and let it go to work. I could immediately hear the pizza crust sizzling and cooking better, so hopefully I was going to get better results. Again, I checked this every 2 minutes or so and rotated it a bit, and this one was done a little quicker at about 6 minutes. The direct cooking definitely made a difference and cooked this faster. And you can see that leoparding and blackening better on the bottom of the crust. That usually translates to better flavor, but we'll see. But yeah, this kind of turned into an experiment between indirect and direct cooking of a pizza stone on a grill, but I think these both came out pretty nice regardless. It definitely took a really long time to heat the grill and adjust it to the proper temperature, but thankfully I made these for lunch, so I had plenty of time to do this. And after all that, they look good, they smell good, now it's just time to taste them. So like over 3 hours later, but we finally made it, and the view is definitely worth it. It's kind of like a hike, think about it. But we've got 2 good looking pizzas that came off the grill, and I'm really excited to try them and see how they taste compared to the stuff that I've made in the oven. And yeah, it was a bit of a hassle trying to figure everything out, but that's part of learning something new, like a grill. And usually next time you can be better, but I'm still waiting to see that with my grill. I still feel like a very much beginner. But let's cut into this thing. And of course, pizza number 2, which was cooked direct. Can definitely hear it in the crunch. And I feel like paper plates are required for pizza for some reason. Kind of looks like a stock photo of a piece of pizza. And again, this is the indirect one. You still get a little bit of the browning on the bottom, just not that dark black leoparding. To fold or not to fold? Why not? Cheers. Also, nothing goes better on pizza than root beer. Changed my mind. Yeah, it's good. Tastes like pizza. I'm finding it hard to notice any differences with the grill than what I've done in the oven before. Like, I was expecting more of a fiery or charcoaly smoky taste, and that could just be me doing it wrong, but I'm not really getting that. And the sauce, cheese, and toppings taste great, but those are the easy parts. It's getting the crust right, which is the challenge. And this one does come off as a little chewy, a little less crisp than my liking, but it is thin, and it's not floppy, so it holds up well. But this is pretty on par with the stuff that I've made before a few times in my oven. But given the circumstances and all the trouble, I think it came out pretty well. But let's get a hold of pizza number 2 to see the differences. I mean, it looks pretty much the same on top, but definitely more noticeable browning and leoparding on the backside. I just have a hunch that I'm gonna like this one a little better. Cheers. Yeah, this picks up in pretty much all the categories that the first one was lacking in. The crust is much more tender, it still has a little chew, but it's definitely more crispy. Still not on par with the stuff you can probably get in New York. This is definitely much better, and much better than anything I've ever got out of my oven. I still need to get a pizza steel because I know those conduct better, especially in the ovens. And I could have done this experiment all wrong, which is why this second one came out better than the first one. Maybe the stone was supposed to be preheated for a lot longer the first time, but it spent like 2 hours out there preheating and all the process of me adding and trying to adjust the heat levels. So I think just cooking direct is a much more viable option, at least from this experiment. And this wasn't really supposed to be an experiment between those two things. I just kind of did that on the fly. But what I was really trying to see is if making pizza on a grill is any easier or any better. And honestly, from this experience, I would say no, not really. If I were to do this again, I would definitely do it in the oven. The process is much more concise and the results don't seem much different. But one last time, I know I can chalk that up to me being a really bad grill master. So I'm sure in the future I'll be trying this again just to see what happens. But if you got something out of this, if you learned something or you had fun, I appreciate your support. I have a lot more ideas. I feel really good filming right now, so I feel really motivated to keep putting stuff out. But yeah, thank you for being here. Thank y'all for watching. Be blessed, and I'll see you next time. Still a winner.